So, welcome, what to do when you get laid off. And before I go on, just wanted to say this is a really special topic for me. Back in May, when JobScan announced the No Fear job search and invited a whole bunch of coaches to present. So it was one of the topics, but it was no longer available. I really wanted that topic. But they told me, well, you got to go where the need is. And right now we don't have anybody doing cover letters. So I took on the cover letters and it was great. I really enjoyed that presentation, and a lot of people reached out to me and told me they got so much value. But, just because it didn't happen then doesn't mean it couldn't happen now. So I took on this topic and I decided, well, I'm going to do a presentation on it anyway, because I am really passionate to help people who have lost their jobs. It is something that I've had in my experience. It happened to me in a very dramatic way, and I know what it's like. I know what you go through. And to me, it was extremely devastating experience. But on the brighter side, there is a silver lining. And I did learn a lot from it, and it changed my career, it changed my life, and it shaped who I am today because of what happened. And I am really excited to share my story with you. So let me go ahead and get started. So first, I want to talk a little bit more about who I am. Some of you may already know, but for those of you who don't, I'm a career transition coach and a resume writer, and I'm also a certified money coach. So that's an extra, a little bit of a training that I took that I use to help people with offer negotiations and asking for what they're worth. So very interesting program. And I'm also a creator of 6 Pillars of a Thriving Career. I will talk a lot about the 6 pillars today and what it means, but it is a program, it's a concept actually that I came up with in my coaching practice after working with people over and over again, after noticing patterns and people reaching out to me about why they are unhappy with their jobs. And basically the 6 pillars are what you need in order to have a thriving career. I typically work with people who are in technology field, mostly in Seattle area because that's where I live, but I work with people all over United States and sometimes even other countries, like UK and Canada. And most of my clients are either people who have been laid off or lost their jobs for another reason, or are still working and they are so unhappy that they would like to lose their jobs. And what I do to help my clients, basically everything that it takes to support somebody in the transition. So starting from what am I going to do next? What is my passion? How do I reinvent my career and add more vibrance to it? Because I feel like I've lost it over the years. To, okay, now that I know what I want to do next, what my next ideal job opportunity looks like, how do I go about it? Building a resume, LinkedIn profile, positioning them as an expert, how to talk about themselves, how to really present themselves in a powerful way so that the potential employers will be impressed by them and want to hire them. Even right now during this pandemic time. So there's been worked with lots of clients in this last year, and there's been some really amazing successes that I'm extremely proud of. So let's talk about the 6 pillars of a thriving career and what it looks like. So I have this funny illustration to just show it to you in an easy and fun kind of way. So the 6 pillars are what you need in order to thrive. Thriving doesn't mean comfortable necessarily. Thriving doesn't necessarily mean I'm okay, I'm good, I can't complain, and I do everything that I love, and I don't do anything that I don't like. Thriving means that sometimes you will have challenges in your career. Sometimes you will face problems that you would have to overcome. but it is part of it is part of the whole picture, because that's how you thrive, by finding unique creative solutions to those problems and overcoming those challenges, and feeling proud because you overcame them. So what those pillars are, so there's a passion, of course, you need to care about what you do, and value. And passion and value, they kind of go hand in hand. They feed on each other. So the more value you feel like you bring to people around you, and those could be people at work, people you're working with, your coworkers, your management, your entire company, and people in the world outside of the company, that the work that you do affects in both direct and indirect way. So being in touch with that value that you bring is very important. And because when you know that you bring that value, it kind of makes you more passionate. And then, of course, the more passionate you are about what you do, the more value you will bring. So the other two pillars, we're going to talk about growth and work environment. So you got to be working in a supportive environment. That is extremely important. And extremely important. And also growing is very important, because you can't be stagnant. One of the biggest complaints that I get with people who come to me because they want to change their jobs is because they tell me, you know, my career feels too stagnant. I'm not growing anymore. And it is very frustrating. So of course, without challenges, there could be no growth. So that kind of explains why you need to have a little bit of everything. And then finally, compensation and work-life balance are also important, and you will find out why from my story in just a little bit. A couple of things I want to say about that. You notice that some pillars are in the middle that are thicker, and then the ones on the sides are a little bit thinner. That doesn't mean that they're less important. All of them are equally important. However, what I've noticed that a lot of people over time, when it comes to compensation and work-life balance, they're willing to tolerate them longer if the passion and the value they bring are still there. However, there's always eventually there comes a time when you realize, oh my gosh, I am underpaid. And you know, that's not okay with me anymore. Or when you realize that the work-life balance is just not supporting the kind of lifestyle that you want. And then you start thinking about, well, some things will have to change. Thinking about what can you change to bring more balance in your life. And eventually also what I noticed what happened is that all the other pillars on the side, like work environment. So if you have a boss that you don't like, that could really affect your passion and your value. If you don't have a work-life balance, if you feel exhausted, if you feel overwhelmed and burnt out, you're not going to be so passionate about your work anymore, and you're not going to bring as much value anymore because of that. And the same thing with growth, because growth, all of these pillars are very much related to each other. So for example, growth really relates to value, because if you don't feel like you're growing in your career, eventually that's going to make you feel a little bit discouraged. And because you are discouraged, you're going to pull away on your value. So this, like all these pillars, they hold your career together. And it's very important to really pay attention to what's going on in your work so that you continue to thrive on a regular basis. About this call, a little bit of a summary, what we're going to talk about. And this call is scheduled for about an hour and a half. We're going to play it by ear. It's about an hour and a half. We might end sooner. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. There'll be a Q&A at the end. So, and I'm going to share my story with you. What happened, you know, about my layoff back in 2007, and the lessons and the takeaways that I've learned from it. And then how I changed my career from a visual effects artist to a career coach, which is a huge, drastic leap. Everybody says, and like, I agree, yep, it is. That's what happened. And then we're gonna talk about the career pitfalls. And I fell into a career pitfall after my layoff, although I didn't notice that until a few years later. But now looking back, and not even now, but I would say ever since I started working as a career expert and digging around those issues around career and how it works, it became really apparent to me that it was a career pitfall. And then how to avoid those pitfalls. And then the SMART action plan. What do you really do? Just like the title suggests, what do you do when you get laid off? Okay, Disney layoff 2007. Well, actually, let me take you back to 2006. So what happened that year? During 2006 early, there were some warning signs that I blissfully ignored. I had the best job in my life by the time I was working as an animator at Disney. I was working on a wonderful feature animation, Meet the Robinsons. It was like everything about that show was great. Everything about Disney was great. I loved my team. The director of the movie was a wonderful man. And it was just, I was just feeling blessed. And right in the middle of all this blessing came Pixar and decided that Pixar and Disney were going to merge together. And we had a new boss, famous person, John Lasseter. You know, everybody knows his name. So he became in charge and decided he's going to restructure a whole bunch of things because for some reason, things the way they were back at Disney didn't work for him, including change the whole story of the movie we were working on. And again, I was blissful. Things were great. We went to Disneyland while we were waiting when the story is going to change and everything. And then lo and behold, by the end of 2006, actually precisely it was December, early December on a Tuesday, because they just love to do it right before Christmas. They decided they were going to lay a whole bunch of people off. They're going to restructure. They're going to get rid of, you know, half of the management and all the people that were working there. And just to paint the picture how dramatic it was a Tuesday morning. They told us, stay by the phone. Somebody's going to call you starting at 9 o'clock. So people were pretty much tied to their desk, feeling extremely anxious, afraid to go to the bathroom, and pretending to work. But really, in that environment, there's not much you can do. And right about 9:15-ish, you started seeing people going by your office and kind of peeping in and saying, hey, it's been great working with you. And you see more of those people walking by, and people that you like, people you build really good relationship with, people you hung out with. And it was really on edge. So the calls happened between 9 a.m. and about noon. So it took them 3 hours. There was a bunch of rooms that they had set up where they were talking to people, giving them folders and everything. I got my call about 11:55. And my office mate, Brett, got his call at about the same time. So I don't know how they did it, in which order. Part of me wants to think, well, maybe they started with the obvious people and the ones that were kind of on the fence were a little bit later, but I'm just kidding myself. So I go to this room and there was our producer feeling extremely guilty, looking extremely guilty. He apologized, gave me the pink folder explaining that half of the company is walking around with those folders. And I said, yes, I know. Half of those people have already stopped by and wished me good luck. So at around noon, they started calling people who were there to stay. And pretty much everybody, after you received your notice, we were allowed to go home. We didn't have to stay. And the whole premise was, so it was December, but technically you're going to be working until January 7th of 2007. And then you have that 3 months of grace period until March, where you're going to receive payments, but you don't have to come to work. It's one of those funny things that large companies do, and I know Microsoft did the same thing. And then part of our severance package, so we got that pay through March, and I think there was a 2-week pay or something like that. And there was no outplacement services. I didn't know at the time that they existed. The idea of a coach, I thought coaches were just in sports. So I didn't even know the profession of a coach even existed at the time. So needless to say, I didn't get a coach. But what they gave us was that whole idea, they call it reverse recruiting, where you get to send your resume, your portfolio to a recruiter, and supposedly they'll help you find a job. And to me at the time, because I was proud and I was so devastated, to me it just felt like, oh, you really don't want to hire me back, to the point where you're actually willing to give my resume to another recruiter so I get another job. Thank you very much. So I went home that day at noon, and I remember just hitting the pillow and cried for like 2 hours. I was so upset. I was devastated. I remember that day I was supposed to have a date with a cute guy, which didn't happen. And, you know, it wasn't really on my mind at the time. I didn't even care. So that's how it happened. I mean, pretty dramatic. And to me, it was the best job I've ever had. And I thought, you know, like, oh my gosh, what's next? So what happened next, long story short, at around March, precisely the time where we were allowed to be working again, technically, because if you work sooner than March, you're not going to get all this pay stubs. So they gave us all this extra time to really think about what happened, take some time off, and think about your career. I got a contract job around March. And of course, it was nothing like Disney, but it was a job. And after that, I got another contract job and another one. And some of those contracts were just, for lack of a better word, horrible, as far as work-life balance and everything. But eventually, probably in the next 1.5 to 2 years, I started my ongoing contract relationship with Sony. And my relationship with Sony was, you know, nothing to complain about. And I kept working there on a contract basis. Sometimes they would renew the contract on the spot. Sometimes they'll let me go for maybe a month or two or a few months and then hire me back. So I really didn't have much to complain about. And right after that, until about 2013, in August of 2013, when one of my contract at Sony was over, I decided that it was going to be the last one. Now, I'll go back and I'll talk more about what happened then. So actually, before I do that, I wanted to share some takeaways with you around layoffs. So layoffs can be very painful, disappointing. Sometimes they can be shocking, especially the first layoff that happens when you don't expect it and you don't know what's coming, or you know it's coming, but you don't think you're going to make it. You're going to be one of the affected people. It can really affect you in a way that sometimes you don't realize. So after a layoff, what happens is that we often go for less than ideal jobs because, first of all, your priority is, well, I don't have a job, so I need to find a new one. And then your self-assessment becomes usually, although not for everybody, but usually becomes lower. So you don't think you can get as much, especially if you were laid off from a really, really good job that you loved. There is this notion, like this belief that we adapt, that the next job is not going to be as good for some reason. And we tend to settle for less than ideal jobs. And sometimes less than ideal could look like, well, less pay. We set our standards lower. Anything on that 6 pillar, if you look at that illustration again, and we will, there could be a settlement. The work-life balance is not as good. The team is not as great. And sometimes we do that because we want to, it's a way, it's one of the defense mechanism, so to speak. So we try to avoid the pain in the future so that the next time, because stability and certainty becomes more important than career satisfaction and really thriving. So we tend to cling on to what we perceive as stable jobs, even though contracts by definition are not stable, but they still give you a sense of certainty because you know exactly when your end date is going to be before you even start working there. And because you sign that contract and you see that end date, it gives you that illusion. Well, and typically, you're not going to leave this job before that contract date unless something really, really bad happens, which, usually is unlikely. And so in that sense, contract jobs become, more attractive. And of course, if something happens again, if you get laid off again, you're not going to be as disappointed because, well, you're not really as attached to that job as you were before. So after a layoff, we tend to somehow become less attached to our career because that's what this shock can do. And this is something I definitely experience in my other positions. And then Sony was okay. I will call it, it was a good job. It was stable. They treated me well. I had nothing to complain about it. But it wasn't, I didn't love it. I wasn't in love with it. I wasn't as passionate about it. And you will see later on, I will demonstrate. So one very important thing I wanted to say before we go on is after that happened and the work that I do with my clients who've gone through layoff is it is very, very, very important. I can't stress this enough to not just hear it because we all heard that a layoff is not a reflection of your value and worth. I mean, I guarantee I'm not the first person saying it. You've heard it before, I'm sure, but we don't always feel it. So it is very important not to just hear it, but to feel it in your bones, to really, really grasp it and understand it and see your value. Because just because you were laid off doesn't mean that you don't bring value to the table. Like if you forget everything else I said, take this with you. So let's talk a little bit about the 6 pillars and how I work with them. And I actually have other tools besides 6 pillars. But one of the things that I do when I work with my clients, I have them really evaluate their current or past job. So if they were laid off, to really think about your last job and really evaluate on a scale of 1 to 10, all the 6 pillars. So I, of course, at the time didn't know about this concept, but now looking back, and it is very important to be extremely honest with yourself because people tend to, when they give those ratings, they either tend to go too low or they get too optimistic. So really, it takes a lot of courage to really look at each pillar and think about, was I really passionate about my job at Disney? So here are my ratings. For the passion, actually, I would give myself an 8. So what does it mean? Yes, the job was good. Yes, I was learning new things in the beginning, but I wasn't really doing massive explosions in your face kind of thing. I wasn't doing the huge effects that, are indispensable. I was doing a lot of background effects, and I did a few things that are really visible, like the writing in the sky. But, I could have really pushed myself. I could have done more. So I give myself an 8. I mean, 8 is still a good number. It's not a 10, but it's still, in the upper crust, so to speak. As far as the value, I give myself a 6. Now, why 6? Well, for once, I mean, if I was a 9 or a 10, I probably wouldn't make a cut. But really, because I wasn't doing those groundbreaking effects that the whole company depended on and the whole movie depended on, yes, I did bring some value, but after what happened, I realized it wasn't as much value as I could have brought. The environment, gosh, that was a 10, no brainer. We were like a family there. Our whole department, we were awesome. We would go out to lunches, we had events, we had parties, we were really tight. And that's probably one thing that I miss about Disney the most, is how great everybody was in our department. The growth, honestly, yes, there was a 5. It wasn't great, but it was okay. I was willing to put up with that for other things that I enjoyed. So as far as the growth, why is it only a 5? Because after I've learned the tools, I was pretty much doing the same thing over and over. I was, cranking up shots and, delivering what they needed. There was a little bit of a learning, probably in the first 3 to 5 months, but after I've learned everything, I was pretty much doing the same thing. The compensation, it was good. It could have been better, maybe. But you know what? I was happy with it. At the time, I didn't complain, so I'm going to give myself a 10. And finally, work-life balance, I give it a 9, because if you know anything about visual effects industry, work-life balance is a rare treasure, is extremely rare. So having an 8-hour work days on a regular basis and occasionally having them turning into 10 hours, that was a catch, a really rare catch. And I've learned that quickly from those contract jobs that followed Disney. So thinking about those pillars, what are my takeaways? Could things have been better? Maybe. Could I have reached out to my manager and asked, hey, I need more intense shots. I want to learn more, take more initiatives. Yes, I could have. And do a little bit more work that's more right in your face, like big explosions, the shots that everybody notices, the kind of shots that the whole team and the whole company depends on you. But, at the time, things just went a little bit wonky when we had a merging with Pixar. And then for a while, we didn't have enough work to do, so we were just goofing around. And I didn't do much about it. So going back, let's talk about what these scores mean, really. And I think it's important to stop and just give a little bit of like, what does 1, 2, 3, and 10. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what I mean is 1, you're miserable and you're ready to get out tomorrow. And 10 is you are extremely happy and things couldn't get better. But there's also something I've noticed in how you break it down. So any score between 1 and 3 means that you are very unhappy and you are complaining about it on a regular basis. Now you will have a good day and you will have a bad day. That's normal. It's never going to be even. There'll be days when it's 3. It's like, yeah, I'm not happy, but it's a job. So what are you going to do? And because you're not going to have the same grade for all 6 pillars, right? You might be willing to tolerate a 3 because you're underpaid for all the other benefits that you're getting. So 4 and 7, and particularly I want to stress on number 7, are actually dangerous because 4 to 7, that score means that things are okay, but you're not really paying attention. So you're not necessarily ready for a change and you're going to stick around, but you definitely feel safer staying there than looking for another job. And when you are at 4 or 7, between 4 and 7, usually to make any change, the change has to happen to you. So it's very unlikely people are going to go and look for another job actively unless something like a layoff happens. So, and finally, 8 to 10 usually means things are going great. And still, if you're an 8, it's a good idea to pay attention to that because you can think about what can you do. to transform it into a 9 or a 10. So a little bit more about the 6 pillars. One of the questions that I get about them is, well, is it possible to have all 10? Realistically, probably not, but it is possible if you pay attention and if you look at what's missing, you can constantly work on how can you improve it. So, and things are going to fluctuate, but when you have a consistent 3 and it's not getting any better or less, then it's time to think about looking for another job. So fast forward, I am working with Sony. And again, I've had several contracts with them, and some contracts were great and some not so much. So I'm putting my Disney numbers just to compare. And in red, this is what happened around 2014, actually 2013. So the passion went down to 5. And part of the reason is because I really burnt out from this constant overtime, lack of life due to really poor work-life balance. And really going for more challenging work meant more overtime. And there's been days when I had to pull 12-hour days, when I had to be at work around 7 in the morning and I didn't go home until late at night, so around 10 o'clock, because that was my limit. At some point, I just had to say enough is enough. So it was crazy. And when your workload is that heavy, the idea of asking for more challenging work just doesn't appeal to you anymore. The value, I would say, go down to 5 again, because I wanted to do, you know, some lighter work to make sure they don't ask me to stay, because I wanted to go home and have a little bit of a break before I even go to bed. As far as the work environment, that really depended on the team, because each contract meant that when you go to a new contract, you actually work with different people. Some of them are the same, some of them are different. But overall, it actually improved because it started with 5 and it went up to 10 because I really liked my manager that I worked with and he was really good to me. So I'm not going to complain about the work environment as much. And people in general, they were nice. I mean, it wasn't Disney, but it was fine by me that it wasn't Disney for obvious reasons, just because if I get laid off again, I'm not going to be as upset. The growth, I'd give it a 2. That's a big dive. So because over the next several years, I would say I didn't grow that much. And part of the reason was because to really stay with a healthy work-life balance. But another part is because my heart was elsewhere. Somewhere in between, I discovered coaching and I wanted to change my career. And I was looking for ways how I can start my own business. So I was already ready to change a career by the time before it was 2013. The compensation, I'd give it an 8. There wasn't a huge growth. It was okay. It could have been more, but you know, I was happy with that. And then finally, work-life balance, depending on where I was. Sometimes Sony had a really, like some shows weren't as intense, so I'd give it a 7. But during some of that contract work, it could be easily a 0 because things just gotten so bad as far as the work-life balance. So now I'm actually gonna go back a little bit. I'm gonna pause a little bit and go back to my story. So what happened in 2013? So I knew I had this ongoing relationship with Sony, and every time the contract was over, I knew that there's gonna be another contract and they're gonna rehire me. And sometimes it happened right away. Sometimes there were a few months in between. But in August of 2013, something happened. A couple of things happened. One is there was a huge crash in the visual effects industry. So there were less and less opportunities in Los Angeles, where I lived at the time. And a lot of companies went belly under. belly up, sorry, went under, and including the one who actually won the visual effects award for that year, for Life of Pi. And that was a really scary story. I'm not going to get into that. But many companies moved to Vancouver, BC. Many moved to India. Many moved to China and Singapore and London and other countries. So for me to really maintain my career and relationship with Sony, I had to relocate to Vancouver, BC, because that's where Sony was going. And I didn't really want to. So another thing happened in my family is that my mother got really ill, and she was also going through a messy divorce. So when I came to visit her in August of 2013, and then I also went to visit Vancouver from Seattle because it's a 3-hour drive. And then they pretty much gave me the tour of the new facilities and said, well, Catherine, if you want a job here, just let me know and I can get you all settled in. And I decided not to. I decided it's time for me to move to Seattle, because I've wanted to move to Seattle, honestly, since the beginning, probably since 2006. I've had that desire. And it was time to do so because I wanted to be with my family. I've neglected the idea of family for far too long. And it was time for me to start my own coaching business and to really to do what I want and take that giant leap. So I made that decision. I moved to Seattle. I lived with my mom. I wasn't working. I was actually unemployed for most of that year. And I hired a coach. That was probably the best decision I made. I didn't have much money at the time, but I found the budget somehow, and I hired a coach who helped me through that transition. And my coach, Debbie, so what happened in that relationship, just not to get too much into a story, I looked back at my career in visual effects, just trying to evaluate what happened there. And when I've learned I was reading career books, I was talking to her, I was doing a lot of soul searching and discovery. And then I realized why I was laid off. And it also dawned on me that I was happy with the decision that I made to leave that industry, because in the end, I mean, yes, people say, oh gosh, visual effects, it's so awesome. Why did you leave? But the reality is I would rather be an awesome career coach, this industry that I'm extremely passionate about, than a just okay visual effects artist. I did not want to be a mediocre visual effects artist anymore, regardless whether or not I would get a job. And I just did not have enough passion for that industry anymore to really get back from 5 to a 9 or a 10. So that is my probably the most honest answer that I could give, and a little bit vulnerable, because it's not something that you'd be willing to admit to a group of people, but that's my truth. So that's what happened. And then in that summer of 2014, after doing some work in soul searching, I got extremely lucky, although whether or not it was luck, it's a little questionable. I did some networking, and I've met the hiring manager of Lee Hecht Harrison, and he told me that Microsoft is about to lay off 3,000 employees. So I shared my story about what happened, what I discovered in my years of visual effects, how I got laid off from Disney, what I've learned from it, and how I've always wanted to be a coach. And I even got a certificate as a certified life coach back in the days. And he was just so impressed by my story and that whole conversation. He said, would you like to join our team as a career coach? And it was just one of those moments. It was amazing. You know, I've had zero experience as a career coach at the time, but it was just the right thing. It felt like the right thing. And I was ecstatic. I said yes. I had no idea what I was saying yes to, because we had a team of 12 coaches with close to 2,000 of affected Microsoft employees going through our office needing career advice. And literally, as everybody described, it was drinking from the hose. You just have to position yourself, and it just like, okay, you want to learn how to swim? Here's the ocean, jump in. We'll see if you drown. That was basically how it was. But the funny thing is that I loved it. I loved it. I was energized. Yes, there was some challenges. Yeah, there were some crazy things happening. There was a lot of up and downs. But in the end of the day, I felt like I was making a difference. I felt like I was bringing value to people, and just talking to them and having, like, yes, I did not have a career coaching experience at the time, but I had coaching experience. You know, I had some credentials, and I was able to bring on my experience and my passion into that work. And in the end of the day, people were saying, like, Catherine, really, you made a huge difference for me. And one of the biggest thing that you were able to give me was you gave me my confidence back after what happened. So very special time. Now, ever since what happened with Microsoft, so I decided this is what I wanted to do. So that was 6 years ago, and I branched off on my own. So I started Blossom Career probably in about a year or so after that. And I did other projects, and now I work with clients on my own, and it's growing, and it's amazing, and it's a great journey. So, and here I am today, talking to you about the 6 pillars. So before we go on, just to wrap up, how do you avoid career pitfalls after a layoff? Because that was a promised topic during this call. So first of all, be aware of them. Be aware that they could happen. Be aware that they've happened and it could happen to you. And really, it requires a lot of courage to have that self-awareness. Because I've met people in all, wherever they are. You know, some people after the layoff, they sound really optimistic and happy and like, oh, thank God I'm out of that Microsoft again. And then people who were crying in my office, and a whole spectrum. So some people take it really hard, and then some people, they seem okay. So wherever you are, even if you feel okay, just giving yourself a little bit of slack and a little bit of understanding that yes, it was hard, it wasn't pleasant, you know, and I need to really look out for myself and think about what's important to me in my career. Taking that time and really evaluate your career on a regular basis is really important. And do it while you're working, you know, don't wait until the layoff. Look at your career. I constantly do it with my business as well. You know, what's missing? What do I need to have more of? How can I improve that? And then especially when you are in between jobs, people are so worried about employment gaps. But really, in my experience, things can happen. You know, sometimes you have a gap. It's not a death sentence to have an employment gap. You know, it's okay. People will be nervous to hire you sometimes when you have a recent gap and it's several years. But mostly because they're worried that you're not going to catch up with the technology. So there are ways you can overcome that and demonstrate that you are still competent. And I'm not saying you have to take a year, but really even just a few weeks, even 1 month, but really use that month productively, not just avoiding what happened and pretending that you are okay, but really thinking about, you know, what can you do better next time? What would you like to do? And don't be afraid to go after your ideal job. Because, you know, one of my slogans that I use when I work with clients, especially people who've been laid off. One of the first thing I tell them that my goal for you is that your next job is going to be 10 times better than the one you just lost. And I believe that wholeheartedly because this can happen. And some of my clients have gotten job offers that are $20,000 or $30,000 more per year than the one that they just got laid off with. And I've had the same conversation with them that sounded like, oh, I'd be lucky to get paid just as much. So it really makes a difference. Now, I talked about taking time off, think about what you want. I don't mean a lot of time, but just maybe a month or two is enough. But sometimes circumstances happen so that it just ends up being longer. And you know what? That's okay. It is what it is. You are where you are. And sometimes when people try to avoid the issue and not really take care of themselves, that alone can cause them stay without job longer than they have to be. So, and then finally, use the resources that are available to you. Use them wisely. You will have resources, and just pay attention. Don't be too proud. At the time when I was laid off from Disney, somebody mentioned to me, well, Catherine, you can collect unemployment after March. And I wouldn't hear any of that. I was too proud. And then after maybe a contract, like a couple of months of contract, I was able to get an unemployment check because apparently you can do that if you're still in the same year when you were laid off. And it's okay. There's no shame in that. Because you're not really taking money away. What you're getting, the unemployment, what it really is you're getting some money back that you paid in taxes. Okay, so I'm not going to get too much into unemployment and all of that. And if you have any questions, let me know. But the biggest thing, I've had to actually convince a few of my clients who didn't want to go for unemployment to, sometimes pride is a good thing, but it's also one of the 7 deadly sins, if you know what I'm talking about. And when it's bad, usually means refusing help when you actually need it. So that pride is not helpful. So use the resources available to you. What resources? Number 1, your severance package. While you have it, if it's still too early, don't spend it all. Don't hoard on it. Don't hold on to every penny. Use it wisely. Invest in yourself and your career. Very important. Now, if I knew that back in 2007, my life would have been different now. It wouldn't have taken me that long to get where I am at right now. So apply for unemployment, talked about that. Budget your money wisely. Really, people, when your regular paycheck gets cut off, you don't get that security anymore, people tend to get into that scarcity mode. They either avoid the issue by wasting money, or they really hold on to it like, oh my gosh, yes, I have 20,000, 10,000, whatever in the bank, but I don't have a job, so I better not spend $200 here and there. That's not helpful, and it could be very harmful. And sometimes when you hoard and you try to do things yourself and you really struggle, you end up struggling for much longer than you have to. And then finally, hire a career coach. Darn it, I know what you're thinking, and I'm not just saying it to advertise my services. I understand you don't all have to work with me, because we're not going to be the best fit with everybody. But after working with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, I can tell you having the right fit with your coach is absolutely crucial. It's probably the most important thing that you can do. But if you have that outplacement service as part of your departure, use it. Don't be too proud. I tell you what, when Microsoft laid off 3,000 employees, and we had close to, I would say, 2,000 people. So there were still a third of people who either decided they didn't need it, maybe they didn't, or they were too proud to use the services. And if you walk away from something like that, you really don't know what you're missing. Part of the reason why companies are now starting to provide this service is because they know the value and they know the statistics. Now, if you don't get it as part of your package, don't despair. It's not, you can still make that decision for yourself, and it's actually even more powerful. I'm not going to get into details why, but I will say one thing. There is a difference between deciding to invest in yourself. That gives you a sense of power, and there's going to be more impact and more results out of that versus having somebody just giving you the money and making it available to you. So all you have to do is say yes or no. And in my experience, I've worked with I contracted with companies where actually company was paying me versus working with individuals. And I'll tell you, I have higher result rates with people who hire me individually. So the difference that it can make for you when you work with a coach. There are several, but I'm just going to talk about a few. So first, you will find a job quicker. That's the most obvious one. You don't have to struggle alone. And that is statistically, because that is something that actually they did surveys and studies on. And they discovered that it cuts your time in half on average, just because you're working with somebody who knows what the good strategies are, who knows what works in the job market, what to avoid, how not to spin your wheels. And typically when people look for a job, they do what they know. So what they've learned in college, what they've learned 10, 12, 20 years ago. But the reality is that right now, what worked 5 years ago, actually what worked last year because of the pandemic is not going to work right now. So it's important to have somebody on your side to help you with those strategies. What's more important to me, the biggest difference is that you will get a higher quality job because possibly even better than the one you lost. Just like I said, you need somebody to really help you boost that confidence and understand that you have that value. So there's a lot of emotional support. And sometimes that emotional support and that confidence is even more important than what you're doing and what the strategies are. And this is something that a good career coach can provide for you. It pays off mentally, psychologically, and financially. Like I said before, I've had people find their job and earn more than before the layoff, just because we had some conversations about that. And then finally, put your career back on track. Because really, this whole conversation today, what happens when we get laid off, we kind of get derailed in our career. Sometimes we see it right away, sometimes we don't. But working with a professional can really help you put your career back on track. So now I want to talk about what to look for in the coach. How do you find the right coach? The first thing is you want somebody you can trust. You can trust their expertise. You can trust that they really know what they're talking about. Some people would say certifications. You know, I got a few, there's a couple missing. I got to tell you, I've been dealing with coaching and in the coach community for years. And one thing I noticed, nobody cares about certifications more than other coaches do. So to me, I mean, I value education. I constantly take more courses to improve myself and to do better for my clients, even if it is something that I think I already know. But to me, a certification is not as important as it is to some people. What's more important is that what I've learned and what I can deliver. But you know, whatever rocks your boat. The other thing, what's really important, I'll just say that you have to trust, because there are a lot of career experts who will sometimes disagree on certain things, and then you will hear conflicting opinions. You listen to one webinar for one coach, they'll tell you one thing, and then you go to another webinar and they'll tell you something different, and it's very confusing. And sometimes you just have to trust your own judgment on that. The other very important thing is, does this person really get you and what you're dealing with? Again, having that chemistry, the good chemistry, and really feeling like your coach is getting you is very important. And I've worked with people that were just amazing. We had a perfect fit and they had great results and they were happy. And then I had a few that were not so much of a good fit, and it happens. You know, it happens to anybody, and that's okay. The other thing I'm going to say, make sure career assessment is included. So it is important. It is something that I didn't used to include right up front when I first started. But after learning more and after more discovery, I really started to recognize the value. Because that's what makes a difference. Anybody can find another job, but you're not just finding another job to survive. You're looking at your career and you are evaluating your career. And it is very important to get back in touch with not just your value, but your talents, your expertise, your passion. And that sometimes career assessment can help you with that, to really get you back to your why. You know, why did you choose this career in the first place? Because sometimes we forget, and we definitely forget after something like a layoff happens. So we need to remember, we need to be reminded of that. And sometimes we change, you know, our interests sometimes change, our passions will change, our values will change. So having that assessment in place can really do wonders. And it will affect your resume, your personal brand, your LinkedIn profile, everything else, and how you talk about yourself. So I can't stress that enough. There are some good career assessment tests out there, and there are some not so good. So it took me a while to pick the one that I can trust and go by and, you know, really be amazed by the results. So what I use is a DISC assessment. You know, this is a topic for another conversation, but I like it because it's simple. Because it's not too confusing to me or people who don't know anything about career assessment. And it sometimes feels like, sometimes when I talk to people and I look at the results, it feels like I'm a doctor looking at an X-ray while the person is telling me the symptoms, what they're dealing with and their experience. And I say, yep, well, that explains it here, that explains it there. So this is really fun. And then finally, of course, very important is accountability, direction, and partnership. So those are really big things about career coaching. Okay, next, wanted to just share this website with you. Let's talk. I wanted to invite you to have a conversation with me. And going back to this website, okay, it's taking too long to load, but I have it open. So blossomcareer.com/discovery-call. So I'm gonna put it up again in here so that you can see it. So this is a free 30-minute discovery call. And I invite you, if you haven't done this call with me, yet, please do. If this is something, if what I talked about today really resonates with you and you wanted to give it a try and you want to find out if this is the right fit and if this is something you wanted to move forward with or thinking about it, let's talk. Again, this is a free call. I open up my schedule for the next 2 to 3 weeks. So blossomcareer.com/discovery call. And pretty simple and straightforward. You can also reach it by going to blossomcareer.com and click work with me, and we'll get you to the same place. And it just takes a little bit of a form because, you know, I wanted to hear more about what you're dealing with, and it will help me understand you better and what kind of support you need. And also if you can upload your resume here if you want to. It's not a requirement, but it does help me see what you're dealing with. So that's pretty much, I'm gonna go ahead and open up for questions. So let's take a look what's next. So yeah, next is the questions. So let me go in the chat room and unmute people. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the sharing. Okay, allow people to unmute themselves. Yeah, so anybody has any questions?
Hi, Catherine. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi.
Yeah, I had this job where I was told that at the end of July I wouldn't have a job because my position got eliminated because of COVID budget cuts.
Mm-hmm.
But then they have been extending my job through August and now through September. Now they're trying to fight if I could extend it through December.
Okay.
At the same time, if that doesn't work, and they will be talking about a pay cut. So I've been told like 15% pay cut is the max that I should accept. Sometimes because I'm hanging in there, I just want to be laid off and get over that because I never been the 6 pillars. I never been happy. I'm in a total 7 when I did the scoring. You said 4 to 7 is risky. You're just there because you're comfort zone, but I've never been happy. I want more growth. So would you recommend to? I know that getting a job while you're unemployed is harder, I think. So I'm not sure if I should just either work through December or take the pay cut, or what do you recommend?
Well, Orlando, that your name? Can I call you
Yes.
Orlando? Yeah, hi
Yes.
Orlando, and thank you for jumping in. I think you actually answered your own question when you said you are unhappy. That is the biggest question I was going to bounce at you. Well, are you okay with that? In my experience, I don't think I've known anybody who's ever been happy with their pay cut, because compensation is very important, and it's not about money, really. It's about getting back what you put in, and it's about giving and receiving, and it's about the flow of that energy. And when people feel like they're being underpaid, so usually a pay cut makes you feel underpaid because you're making less money than before. It's different when you're changing careers, but when you are at the same job and they just offer you less money because they can't afford you or something happens, it's different. It's different because you're doing the same thing, you're just getting less. So naturally, you're not going to put in as much energy into the job because it will affect you emotionally. And I'm not going to get too much into the science of it, and I'm not going to geek out on you, but just to give you a short answer that you were looking for, I would definitely start looking for another job because you are unhappy. And I will add that my gut feeling says that when you give yourself a 7, there's possibly you're being too nice, too kind, a little,
Right.
because people do it all the time. They either they either grade it too high or too low, just depending on the personality, depending on which day I ask them. So it's probably in some areas even less than 7. But I'm not going to get into it. The bottom line is that you mentioned you are unhappy, and doesn't mean that you have to quit your job now until December, but you can start looking while you're still working.
Yeah, like you said about the nice part, they're even having me train the people in India that is gonna take over our jobs.
Mm.
So that kind of hurts. So
Well,
thank you, Catherine.
oh, absolutely. And then, if you want to talk about it more, I mean, feel free to set up a call, the discovery call.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else? And you can just go ahead and unmute yourself. One person at a time, please.
Hi, Catherine. Good morning. I have a question. My name is Marlise.
Hi, Marie.
Hi. I am looking to transition, or I have been transitioning into a new industry, coming from fashion retail and I'm open to 3 industries: finance, healthcare, or technology, but specifically in the function of supply chain management or sustainable business operations. So keeping the function because I like the work, but I'm open to the 3 different industries. And my goal definitely is more compensation. And so I'm actively working through that. I'm in a program for that. But what I discovered in this time, because I did definitely take time off after being laid off in March, to just really evaluate what I like and what I want to do. And what has surfaced from that is my creativity. I began engaging back into my creativity. And I've been doing a lot of like social justice art. I, entered an exhibit. I did another exhibit for PPE. I started making masks, volunteering with the organization and making PPE. And now I feel like actually turning that into a company, making PPE masks for people who are disadvantaged, like people in the inmates in the criminal justice system from mass incarceration that are being neglected, and the vulnerable population, as well as immigrants, as well as the elderly. And so I'm also super passionate about this as well. And so my thought is maybe I can do both. Like maybe I can start this company, make the PPE, maybe sell it online, and still do a career transition and have a fruitful career. I just want to bring that to your attention. Like, am I maybe way above my head, or is this something that I should move forward with?
Well, actually, the short answer, you're not way above your head. What you have is you have a calling. You have a calling, and that's what it sounds like to me. And you are very passionate, and passion by definition is unstoppable desire to make something happen. As it pertains to career, there are many definitions of passion, but this is the one I'm talking about. And what I hear you say is that you have a passion and you have a desire to make a change in some areas. So the short answer is go for it. Is it going to be easy? No. Are you going to have challenges? Yeah, probably. But is it worth it for you?
Yeah.
That's the biggest question. Is it really worth it for you?
Yeah, and I honestly see it as worth it,
Yeah, I thought so too. Yeah, I got that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marlise.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? We still have 15 minutes. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Catherine, I have a question.
Yes.
So my name is Dennis Moss, and I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I've never used a career coach. My parents were not professionals, so I personally think I'm a strong candidate for a career coach. But my background is all highly technical. So I'm an engineer. I have an MBA. I've held progressively more responsible positions, but I'm at the point where I really need guidance from not only just a generalist, which is my perception of you, but someone who's been there before and done it before. So I guess 2 quick questions. Where do you feel you can help, and where do you feel someone who's already done it is a better choice? And How do I go about finding those people that are willing to be coaches or provide guidance that do have that quite frankly, executive experience?
Well, to answer your question, Dennis, I'll be happy to talk to you. So let's set up a call. And two, I do have experience working with people in technology. In fact, starting with Microsoft, every person that I've worked with was in high tech. So I've worked with engineers, and I worked with project managers, and people in marketing, and people in data science. So I actually work really well with high tech individuals. And all we have to do is a call. And if it doesn't work, I'll think of a couple of people I could refer you to.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, sometimes just want to add something in my experience about the good fit. Sometimes people will look for somebody who had the exact same background. And in my experience, having a similar background is not really as essential as having a connection. And I do have a niche, and I know some of you think, well, you're a generalist. Not really. I have a niche. I work specifically with people in technology, marketing, lots of project managers, operations, but I can work with any profession, really. The most weird, out of the blue profession I ever worked with was a cop. Actually helped him find a job in the Seattle Police Department. That was years ago, and I like to joke about it. I told the cop what to do, and it felt good. But really, seriously, there are some industries that I don't feel as comfortable with than others. And one of the uncomfortable industries were medical academical roles. And I got a privilege to work with this amazing lady who was a doctor, and she was going for PhD roles in the biopharmaceutical. And it was outside of my expertise. So, and I actually said that. But because we had such a strong connection and we really worked well together, it actually ended up being a good experience.
I want to just go back to the...
Orlando, are you talking to me or are you having a conversation? You're showing up here.
I don't know. I'm just writing your niche. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Project manager, marketing, data science, Microsoft.
Yeah.
I've been working
awesome.
10 years as a vendor, and I always wanted a full-time position on Microsoft. So just taking notes.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Yeah, like I was saying, yes, have an industry fit is important because the person understands the lingo and how things work. But sometimes it's not the most essential thing. Sometimes just because we are trained in career transition and we can help pretty much anybody going through a transition. And then also it is possible to have somebody who fits you like a glove on paper, but then when you have a conversation, it's just, there is no chemistry, and that can happen too. So that's my point. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, we have about 10 minutes left officially before 11:30. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up a little bit early. I'm sure we all have lives to go back to, but I do encourage you to reach out to me if you have any questions. You can email me, reach out to me via LinkedIn. Go to, again, blossomcareer.com/discovery call and set up a call. If you want, it doesn't cost anything, and we may end up working together or not, and that's okay either way, whatever works for you.